Donald Trump's threat to block the Gordie Howe International Bridge was framed as defending American interests. It was presented as a trade policy decision. It was justified as protecting national security. But new reporting suggests something entirely different. Hours before Trump publicly threatened the bridge, the owner of the competing Ambassador Bridge met with his Commerce Secretary. And now Congress is demanding records. This is no longer a policy dispute. This is a potential corruption investigation. The Gordie Howe International Bridge represents a direct threat to one of North America's most profitable private monopolies. The Ambassador Bridge, owned by the Maroon family, has controlled commercial truck traffic between Windsor and Detroit for decades. That monopoly generates enormous revenue. The new publicly funded bridge would introduce competition, improve efficiency, and reduce private control over critical infrastructure. The distinction matters because what happens next raises serious questions about whether federal power was deployed to protect private wealth rather than national interest.
We begin with breaking news and the new warning to Canada by the U.S. president. The opening of a nearly $6.5 billion bridge funded entirely by this country under threat tonight. Donald Trump declaring on social media this evening, "I will not allow this bridge to open until the United States is fully compensated." And also importantly, Canada treats the United States with the fairness and respect that we deserve. We will start negotiations immediately. The Gordie Howe International Bridge would be the third crossing between Windsor, Ontario and Detroit, Michigan. Currently, there's a tunnel and the Ambassador Bridge. Its American owners claim the new bridge infringes on their exclusive right to collect tolls and have been fighting that in court for years.
According to reports from the New York Times, Matthew Maroon, whose family owns the Ambassador Bridge, met with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick shortly before Trump's public threat. The timeline is not subtle. A private bridge owner who stands to lose millions meets a senior administration official. Hours later, the President of the United States threatens to block the competing public project. That sequence is why Congress is now involved. Matthew Maroon is not a neutral observer in this story. He is a Trump donor. His family retained a lobbying firm with direct ties to Trump's chief of staff. This is not circumstantial proximity. This is structural access to power. When that access is followed within hours by a presidential action that benefits the same private interest, the optics become unavoidable. The question is no longer whether Trump opposed the bridge. The question is why and for whom. The Ambassador Bridge is a private asset. It generates revenue through tolls on the busiest commercial land border crossing in North America. The Gordie Howe Bridge is a publicly funded infrastructure project backed by binding agreements between Canada and Michigan. It was designed to improve safety, reduce congestion, and support cross-border trade. The Maroon family has opposed this project for years because it eliminates their monopoly.
Let's bring in CTV's chief political correspondent, Vassy Kapelos. Now, Vassy, so much to unpack here. Let's get to the issue of compensation first. What kind of compensation is Donald Trump looking for?
Yeah, not a huge amount of clarity there, Omar, but 2 points that I think are worth making. First of all, I am told by a number of people in this government that though the backers of the Ambassador Bridge, the competing bridge, are supporters of Trump and his administration. The second point that's important to make is that the bridge is being paid for by Canada. Once it generates revenue through tolls, our costs will be recouped, but there's an agreement with Michigan to then start sharing revenue. So the idea of compensation, I'm not exactly sure how it extends beyond any of that.
That opposition is not abstract. It is financial. If federal authority was used to defend a donor's monopoly rather than strengthen trade infrastructure, that crosses a line. This would not be aggressive trade policy. This would be favoritism. And favoritism using executive power raises corruption concerns, not policy disagreements. Congressman Robert Garcia is now demanding emails, texts, and calendar records tied to the reported meeting between Maroon and Lutnick. Garcia sits on the House Oversight Committee. His request is specific. He wants documentation showing whether a politically connected billionaire influenced trade policy. This is not partisan speculation. This is institutional oversight responding to a timeline that suggests coordination between private interest and federal action. Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib did not mince words. She described the situation as billionaire corruption being par for the course. She questioned why a private bridge owner would be meeting with administration officials right before the president threatened a safer and more efficient competitor. Those are serious accusations, and they are now part of the congressional record. Michigan Congresswoman Hillary Scholten has introduced legislation to block federal interference in the bridge's opening. The bill, titled the Michigan-Canada Partnership Act, is designed to prevent last-minute roadblocks from Washington. Lawmakers are not waiting for the investigation to conclude. They are moving preemptively because the concern is operational, not hypothetical. This suggests that even Trump-aligned Republicans in Michigan view the threat as problematic. Trump could theoretically withhold U.S. Customs and Border Protection personnel from the Detroit side of the bridge, effectively rendering it non-functional. That is not rhetoric, that is operational leverage. If staffing authority is used to sabotage a public infrastructure project in order to protect a private monopoly, that would not be economic nationalism. That would be political favoritism with real-world consequences for supply chains, manufacturing, and binational trade. The reaction inside Trump's own party is telling. A Republican senator from Alaska has asked Canadians to look past Trump's rhetoric. Michigan Republicans have publicly expressed confusion. The House passed a joint resolution with Republican defections aimed at limiting Trump's tariff overreach. This is not quiet compliance. This is institutional discomfort. And when donor influence allegations surface in that environment, the damage multiplies. If this were a strong, unquestioned presidency, Republican voices would stay silent. Instead, there is visible unease. That unease signals that even within Trump's coalition, this episode does not align with the populist messaging that built his political brand. Populism does not survive donor favoritism. Trade hawk rhetoric does not survive private monopoly defense. Mark Carney does not need to escalate this situation. He does not need to accuse. He does not need to inflame. The story is unfolding inside Washington. The more Trump reacts impulsively, the more the institutional system responds. Carney's discipline allows American lawmakers to defend the bridge without it appearing as foreign interference. He remains calm. He remains factual. He lets the pressure build where it belongs, on the White House. Trump built his political brand on toughness, on confrontation, on fighting for American workers. But if this episode becomes defined not as toughness but as protection of a politically connected donor, that narrative collapses. And once the narrative shifts, it becomes difficult to reverse. This is not a policy fight. This is a story about proximity, access, and whether executive authority was used for public good or private gain. The Financial Times and other outlets have reported that Trump is now considering rolling back some of his tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. That reversal, if it happens, would come after months of insisting those tariffs were essential. It would come after claiming Americans were winning. It would come after denying economic reality. If Trump retreats on tariffs while simultaneously facing a corruption investigation over the bridge, the combined optics are devastating. This is no longer about whether Trump is tough on Canada. This is about whether his actions serve American interests or donor interests. That distinction is critical because voters tolerate policy disagreements. They do not tolerate perceived corruption, especially when it affects cross-border trade worth billions annually and disrupts supply chains that support American jobs. Congress is demanding records. Lawmakers are introducing protective legislation. Republican senators are distancing themselves. Michigan politicians are defending the bridge. All of this is happening without Canadian escalation. Carney did not need to threaten. He did not need to retaliate. He simply allowed the institutional process to work. And now that process is turning inward on Trump. If emails and records confirm coordination between private monopoly interests and federal threats, this will not be an embarrassment, it will be a scandal. And scandals erode authority faster than any foreign policy failure. Trump attempted to pressure Canada. He may have triggered congressional oversight. He attempted to defend American interests. He may now have to defend his own actions. The Gordie Howe Bridge was supposed to be leverage. Instead, it may become evidence. Evidence of proximity. Evidence of timing. Evidence of a presidency that reacts first and explains later. The bridge is steel and concrete. But this story is about power and whether it was used for the public good or for a donor. That is the question Congress is now demanding answers to. And that is the question Trump cannot afford to leave unanswered.